What if everything you thought you knew about your own father turned out to be a lie? What if the very man whose face you've carried in your mind for your entire life, the man you called Dad, wasn't who you thought he was? Imagine growing up under the scrutiny of millions, feeling the weight of history pressing down on you, all while questioning one of the most fundamental truths a human being can ever face: the identity of your biological father. For Prince Harry, that question, long whispered in hushed corridors, has allegedly found an answer that could shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. And today, we dive deep into the story that has been whispered behind palace walls, scandalized tabloid headlines for decades, and now threatens to reshape the narrative of one of the world's most famous families. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It begins with a boy born into privilege, yet haunted by whispers. A boy whose life was mapped out before he could even speak, whose every move would be scrutinized, and whose every misstep would become public fodder. Prince Harry, the second son of Prince Charles and Princess Diana, arrived in the world in 1984 with all the promise of royalty, but beneath the pomp and ceremony, a storm of speculation had already begun. From the very beginning, questions lingered about who really was his father. James Hewitt, a cavalry officer who would later become infamous for his affair with Princess Diana, had become a shadow figure in Harry's early life. The rumors, persistent and unrelenting, suggested that Harry might not share the blue blood of his father, King Charles III, but rather the lineage of Hewitt, a man already entangled with scandal and secrecy. The implications were explosive, yet no one had definitive proof until now. The story that unfolds is more than a tale of royal intrigue. It is a journey into the very human struggles of identity, belonging, and betrayal. Imagine living your entire life under the assumption that your father is one person, only to have that certainty questioned by whispers, secrets, and the possibility of evidence. For Harry, these weren't idle rumors. They were shadows that shaped his childhood, influenced his decisions, and colored his relationships. The pressure of a crown is not merely ceremonial. It is a weight that extends to the core of identity itself. And in Harry's case, that weight was complicated by a truth that no child should ever have to question. Who is my father? Let's pause for a moment and consider the stakes. This is not just a family matter. This is global news. The British monarchy is one of the most scrutinized institutions on earth. Every word, every gesture, every secret carries consequences that ripple through media, politics, and history. If it turns out that James Hewitt is, in fact, Harry's biological father, the implications are staggering. It challenges not just the personal narrative of a prince, but the very perception of monarchy, legacy, and public trust. History, as they say, is written by those who control the narrative. But what happens when the narrative itself is upended? To understand why this revelation matters, we have to go back to the very beginning. The palace corridors, the press frenzy, the hidden letters, and the quiet moments of doubt that no cameras could capture. From the outside, Harry's childhood looked gilded and secure. He had every comfort, every privilege, and the adoration of a nation. But behind the smiles and official portraits, there was a growing storm of speculation. Teachers noted a quiet intensity in him, a boy sometimes brooding, sometimes restless. Friends of Diana whispered about late-night conversations, about Diana's frustrations with the press, and about her candid reflections on her relationships. In these private moments, the rumors about James Hewitt were more than idle chatter. They were part of a narrative that Diana herself acknowledged, though never publicly confirmed. The boy grew up surrounded by questions that could not be asked aloud, and secrets that could not be spoken. And then there was the media. Tabloids thrived on speculation, feeding the public a mix of truth, rumor, and fantasy. Headlines screamed about affairs, betrayals, and royal secrets. James Hewitt became a figure larger than life, a man whose military career was overshadowed by whispers of a scandal that would not die. To the outside world, he was just an officer. To insiders, he represented a potential disruption to the carefully constructed royal image. And hovering above it all was Harry, unaware of the depth of the speculation, feeling its echoes in subtle ways, the sly glances, the hushed whispers, the curiosity of schoolmates who had already read the tabloids. For a child, navigating this world was no small feat. For a child of royalty, it was nearly impossible. But let's step back. Why does this story resonate so deeply? Why does the potential paternity of a prince capture global attention in a way that few other personal revelations could? Part of it is the allure of royalty itself. The world watches the British royal family not just because of their ceremonial roles, but because they are symbols of tradition, legacy, and continuity. And when continuity is questioned, the fascination becomes intense. People are drawn to secrets, to the cracks in what seems perfect. They want to see what lies behind the polished portraits, the official narratives, and the pomp of royal protocol. And in Harry's case, the cracks may reveal a truth more human, more complicated, and more shocking than anyone imagined. It's also about identity. At its core, this story is about a man coming to terms with who he is and who he is not. Prince Harry has long been open about his struggles with mental health, his search for purpose, and his need to define himself outside the shadow of a father who was often distant, both physically and emotionally. Imagine the emotional complexity of discovering that the father who shaped your life, guided your choices, and influenced your very sense of self may not be your biological parent. It is a question that strikes at the heart of human experience. Who are we, really, if the people we trust and love are not as they seem? Of course, there are skeptics. There always are. The palace itself maintains silence. The British press is divided between sensationalism and discretion. Experts debate the plausibility of claims, the timing of relationships, and the interpretation of evidence. James Hewitt's role is scrutinized endlessly, dissected by historians, royal commentators, and gossip columnists alike. Yet in the midst of all this doubt, one undeniable fact emerges. For Harry, the question is not academic. It is deeply personal, and the alleged DNA test that has now surfaced may finally offer clarity, or at least a new chapter in a saga that has captivated the world for decades. As we explore this story, you will see the layers unfold. The early years of a boy caught between adoration and speculation, the intimate reflections of a mother torn between love and secrecy, the influence of a man who became a shadow in a royal household, and the media maelstrom that amplified every rumor into global fascination. You will hear of moments that have never been revealed before, private anecdotes that hint at the emotional stakes, and the extraordinary circumstances that have brought us to this alleged revelation today. Every piece of the puzzle matters, every whisper has weight, and every revelation carries consequences that extend far beyond the personal. And yet, even as we piece together the story, the tension remains. What will this truth mean for Harry? How will the monarchy respond? What are the broader implications for public perception, for history, and for the prince himself? The answers are not simple. They are complex, messy, and profoundly human. But that is precisely what makes this story irresistible. It is a tale of identity, scandal, love, betrayal, and the enduring question of what it truly means to be a family. So as we begin this journey, ask yourself, if you were Harry, would you want to know? How would you react? Could you carry the weight of a secret that, once revealed, could change everything you thought you knew about your past, your lineage, and your future? These are the questions that will guide our story, that will shape our exploration, and that will keep you on the edge of your seat as we navigate the shocking revelations and emotional twists that lie ahead. From the moment Prince Harry was born, the world had its eyes on him. Not just as a baby of the crown, but as a boy who would inherit a legacy wrapped in privilege, expectation, and scrutiny. But even in those first days, long before he could walk, talk, or understand the enormity of what it meant to be royalty, there were whispers, soft at first, like shadows in the corners of grand palace halls, then louder, carried by the press, repeated in social circles, and finally, impossible to ignore. The rumor that would haunt Harry for decades wasn't about politics, wealth, or public duty. It was personal, it was intimate, and it was explosive. The question was simple, devastating in its simplicity. Was James Hewitt, the cavalry officer who would later become a notorious figure in Princess Diana's life, actually Harry's biological father? The story begins not with scandal, but with observation. Teachers, nannies, and palace aides all noticed something about the young prince. He was restless, curious, intensely intelligent, but also introspective in ways that set him apart from other children of his age, and even from other members of the royal family. Some noted the resemblance, an uncanny likeness in mannerisms or physical traits, to James Hewitt, though no one dared say it aloud. It was a question hovering at the edge of conversations, a shadow over the nursery corridors. And for Harry, even as a child, there was a sense that not everything was as it seemed. Publicly, his life appeared perfect. Smiling in official portraits, attending ceremonial events, and waving at the press, he seemed the embodiment of what royalty promised. But behind closed doors, the whispers grew. Diana, who had been candid in her private reflections, had confided frustrations, doubts, and fears to friends and confidants. She spoke of loneliness, of being trapped under the weight of expectations, and of a love complicated by her husband's own struggles and infidelities. James Hewitt, her lover, became part of this narrative, a presence that was at once alluring and forbidden, and one whose connection to her youngest son could not be ignored. Imagine being that child. Imagine growing up with the knowledge, or at least the sense, that people around you are questioning something as fundamental as your parentage. The emotional impact is enormous, even if unspoken. Harry's early life was not one of carefree play or normal childhood exploration. It was a life shadowed by speculation, punctuated by moments of insecurity, and under the constant gaze of a world hungry for detail. The tabloids latched onto every story, amplifying innuendo into headlines, and amplifying private family matters into public spectacle. And through it all, Harry had to navigate an identity that felt both constructed and fragile. By the mid-1980s, rumors had started to crystallize. Friends of Diana's, in quiet conversations away from the press, hinted at the possibility that Harry was not the biological son of Prince Charles. These whispers were fed by Diana's well-known closeness to James Hewitt, who had been assigned as a riding instructor for the royal family and quickly became her confidant. The timing of events, combined with the chemistry between Diana and Hewitt, gave fuel to speculation that would not die. For the public, the story was titillating. For Harry, it was disorienting. But what makes these rumors so potent is not just the speculation itself, it's the emotional weight it carries. For a child, questions of paternity strike at the core of identity. Who am I if the person I call father is not truly my father? What does that mean for my place in the world, my sense of belonging, my understanding of love and family? In Harry's case, the stakes were magnified exponentially. He wasn't just any child. He was a prince, heir to a legacy that stretched back centuries, whose every move would be watched, judged, and interpreted. To grow up in such a world while quietly questioning the foundation of your family is an almost unimaginable burden. Even within the royal family, there were tensions and unspoken anxieties. Prince Charles, whose own marriage had become increasingly strained, may have sensed the undercurrents of rumor, but there is little public record of him addressing it directly. Diana, meanwhile, balanced her public duties with her private life, aware that every decision, every relationship, was scrutinized to the extreme. And James Hewitt, for his part, became a figure both vilified and sensationalized, emblematic of a scandal that the monarchy could neither fully control nor ignore. The public fascination was relentless. Media outlets pounced on every opportunity to connect Hewitt to Harry, highlighting physical similarities, retelling details of Diana's confessions, and analyzing timelines with forensic precision. Some reports were speculative, some intentionally misleading, but all contributed to a growing narrative that Harry's paternity was not what it appeared to be. It was a story that transcended simple gossip. It became part of the cultural conversation about the monarchy, privacy, and the limits of public interest. Harry's own life continued against this backdrop of suspicion. As he grew, he encountered moments that would shape his emotional development in profound ways. Boarding school experiences, interactions with peers, and early brushes with fame and media scrutiny all contributed to a sense of being different, of being watched, of being questioned, even in ways that were not overt. While other children may have navigated curiosity and teasing, Harry navigated curiosity amplified 1,000-fold, compounded by the underlying question that no one dared articulate fully. Who is my father? And yet, for all the speculation, one thing remained undeniable. The rumors persisted. They were whispers that would not fade, shadows that followed Harry throughout his childhood and adolescence. Every gesture, every resemblance, every anecdote was interpreted through the lens of possibility. And while the palace maintained official silence, the rumor mill thrived, fueled by anonymous sources, leaked documents, and the public's insatiable appetite for scandal. But why does this matter now? Why revisit whispers and rumors that have persisted for decades? Because the stakes have shifted. Today, what was once speculation has been met with a scientific lens, with DNA testing that promises clarity. What was once a shadowy question in palace corridors may now have an answer. And the consequences, both personal and public, could be profound. Harry, the boy once whispered about in hushed tones, now faces a revelation that could reshape not only his understanding of self, but the world's understanding of a family long placed on a pedestal. As we move forward in this story, it is essential to remember that these are not just rumors. They are threads in a larger narrative about identity, secrecy, and power. Every rumor, every suggestion, every shadow contributes to a portrait of a prince whose life has been anything but ordinary. The whispers of James Hewitt, persistent and potent, form the backdrop for a journey that is both deeply personal and inescapably public. They are a reminder that even those born into privilege cannot escape the fundamental human questions of lineage, love, and belonging. And yet, even as we trace these rumors, even as we recount the moments that haunted Harry's early life, there is an undercurrent of anticipation. Because for decades, no definitive answer existed. The whispers, speculation, and media frenzy could only point in one direction. They could hint, suggest, and imply, but they could not provide certainty. That is why the alleged DNA test matters. That is why the question of James Hewitt is no longer just a tabloid story. It is a matter of truth, of revelation, and potentially, of history. To understand the gravity of the rumors that have haunted Prince Harry, we first need to understand the man at the center of them, James Hewitt. He is not just a footnote in royal gossip. He is a figure whose life, decisions, and relationship with Princess Diana cast a long shadow over decades of speculation. Hewitt's story is a complicated mix of charm, controversy, and consequence. A man whose personal narrative intersects with royalty in ways that would forever shape public perception. James Hewitt was born in 1958 in Staffordshire, England, into a world far removed from palaces and coronations. From a young age, he displayed a discipline and ambition that would lead him to a career in the British Army. His choice to join the cavalry was not uncommon for someone of his background, but it set the stage for a life defined by structure, hierarchy, and service. Hewitt quickly distinguished himself, not only for his military skill but for his charisma, intelligence, and ease with authority. He was a man comfortable in structured environments, yet one who also carried a restless energy, a desire to find excitement and significance wherever he could. It was that combination of discipline and charm that eventually brought him into the orbit of the royal family. By the early 1980s, Hewitt had secured a position as an instructor at the Household Cavalry, responsible for training and mentoring, but also engaging in ceremonial duties that brought him into contact with Diana, Princess of Wales. Their initial interactions were professional, but there was a spark of connection that would soon grow into something far more personal. For Diana, whose marriage was already strained and whose isolation within the royal framework was profound, Hewitt became a confidant, a source of emotional support, and eventually, a lover. For Hewitt, the relationship was transformative in its own way, offering proximity to a world he had admired from afar and a connection with a woman whose fame and influence were extraordinary. The affair itself has been well documented in tabloid accounts and memoirs, yet every recounting carries shades of contradiction. Hewitt has described moments of intimacy and secrecy, the thrill of being close to Diana, and the intoxicating mixture of danger and desire that accompanied their liaison. Diana, in her private reflections, spoke of a complicated love, of feeling unseen and unsupported by her husband, and of finding solace in someone who appeared to understand her. For Harry, though, the ramifications of this affair would only become clear years later. The whispers, the speculation, and the lingering questions about paternity were rooted in a relationship that combined passion, secrecy, and timing, a volatile mix for any child caught in its wake. To grasp the full impact of Hewitt's connection to the royal family, one must also understand the man himself. He was not a passive participant in these events. Hewitt cultivated a persona that was at once charming and assertive, capable of navigating both the strictures of military life and the subtle social dynamics of the palace. His presence was commanding, yet adaptable, a trait that allowed him to integrate into Diana's private world while maintaining a degree of discretion. At the same time, Hewitt's ambitions and desire for recognition would eventually fuel his own public narrative, leading to memoirs, interviews, and a degree of notoriety that ensured he remained a central figure in the story of Harry's paternity. The timing of the affair is crucial to understanding the speculation about Harry. James Hewitt began his relationship with Diana in 1986, 2 years after Harry's birth in 1984. This timing has been cited repeatedly by skeptics of the paternity rumors, as it seemingly rules out the possibility of Hewitt being Harry's biological father. Yet, the persistence of the rumor indicates that timelines, while important, have not quelled public fascination. Even if the dates suggest otherwise, the perception of connection, the visual similarities, the emotional resonance, the public's willingness to believe scandal, has kept the question alive for decades. Beyond the timing, Hewitt's public image contributed to the intrigue. In interviews and memoirs, he has painted a picture of charm, allure, and involvement in Diana's private world, yet one that is carefully curated to maintain personal dignity. Some view him as opportunistic, seeking attention and fame by association with royalty. Others see a man caught in circumstances beyond his control, whose relationship with Diana was as much about human connection as it was about scandal. Regardless, the image that emerged in the public consciousness was one of a man intertwined with royal secrecy, a figure who could not be ignored, even decades later. Hewitt's relationship with Diana also sheds light on the culture of secrecy and discretion that defines the royal household. Their affair was conducted with an understanding of timing, place, and discretion, yet inevitably became a topic of public speculation. For the monarchy, managing such situations requires a delicate balance, maintaining public image while navigating private realities. Hewitt, by virtue of his charm, military discipline, and proximity to Diana, became a central node in a network of secrecy and rumor that extended from private bedrooms to palace corridors to global headlines. For Prince Harry, the implications were subtle yet profound. Though he was too young to understand the details of his mother's affair, the presence of James Hewitt in family discussions, social circles, and public speculation created an undercurrent of tension. Friends, relatives, and even casual observers noted physical similarities between Harry and Hewitt, expressions, mannerisms, features that fueled the whispers. It is in these subtle details that the rumor took root, not merely in scandal or gossip, but in human perception of resemblance, emotional intuition, and the fascination with connections that defy easy explanation. But perhaps most importantly, understanding James Hewitt requires understanding the intersection of personal desire and historical consequence. Hewitt was a man whose life intersected with royalty in ways that could not be undone. His actions, choices, and relationship with Diana have reverberated for decades, influencing not only his own life, but the trajectory of those closest to him. The alleged DNA test that now enters the story is, in many ways, the culmination of a lifetime of decisions, coincidences, and connections, a scientific instrument poised to either confirm or upend the narratives that have persisted for decades. And yet, even as we dissect the life of James Hewitt, it is clear that no single person can carry the weight of history alone. The monarchy, the press, Diana herself, and the child who would grow to be Prince Harry all play roles in this complex tapestry. Hewitt is neither villain nor hero. He is a man whose presence in this story amplifies questions of identity, loyalty, and truth. His story is inseparable from the rumors, yet also distinct, a reminder that history is never simple and that human relationships are fraught with complexity, contradiction, and consequence. As we reflect on Hewitt's life, the emotional stakes become clear. For decades, his presence has haunted the narrative of Harry's identity. For the public, he is the embodiment of intrigue, a living symbol of questions that have refused to die. For Harry, the potential truth is deeply personal. A revelation that could redefine not just his childhood memories, but his understanding of himself. And while the world debates motives, timelines, and credibility, one undeniable fact remains. James Hewitt is a man whose life is inextricably linked to the story of a prince, a princess, and a family whose secrets refuse to stay buried. The British royal family is an institution built on tradition, ceremony, and the careful curation of image. Every gesture, every smile, every appearance is calculated to convey stability, dignity, and continuity. But beneath the gilded surface, there exists a world of secrets, whispers, and unspoken truths, a labyrinthine network of private lives hidden behind public facades. And for Prince Harry, those secrets were more than abstract curiosities. They were a force that shaped his childhood, influenced his sense of self, and cast long shadows over the man he would become. From the outside, the monarchy appears impervious to scandal. The crown is ancient, the ceremonies precise, the rules clear. But history tells a different story. Every generation has faced moments of tension, affairs, betrayals, and controversies, some hidden, some exposed. The royal family's ability to manage these situations is a mixture of diplomacy, discretion, and, at times, outright suppression. Secrets are not just concealed for propriety's sake. They are tools of power, instruments to maintain the illusion of perfection, and shields to protect the institution from the destabilizing effects of public knowledge. For Harry, the culture of secrecy was ever present. From a young age, he learned that the world he inhabited was governed not only by rules, but by invisible lines of discretion. Nannies whispered instructions, aides monitored interactions, and even simple conversations were framed by an awareness that nothing could be entirely private. And at the center of it all was the question that would haunt him for decades. Could the father he called Dad truly be his biological parent? The whispers surrounding James Hewitt were part of this culture, acknowledged privately by some, dismissed publicly by others, and magnified endlessly by the press. The secrecy within the royal family is not merely a product of modern times. It is deeply rooted in history. Kings and queens have long managed personal scandals with a combination of subterfuge, coded communication, and public distraction. From clandestine affairs to disputed heirs, the monarchy has always been adept at masking the messy realities of human behavior beneath a veneer of ceremony. These historical patterns set the stage for the modern complexities that Harry would inherit, where the personal becomes political, and a single revelation can reverberate across generations. Consider the emotional calculus required in such an environment. For Diana, secrecy was both a protection and a prison. She had to navigate the rigid expectations of the crown while raising children under constant scrutiny. Every choice carried weight. How to speak, what to reveal, how to maintain dignity in public while coping with private turmoil. For Prince Charles, maintaining the appearance of stability was equally paramount. For James Hewitt, discretion was essential to avoid scandal and potential censure. And for Harry, these intertwined dynamics created an atmosphere of tension, curiosity, and, at times, fear, a world where questions were dangerous, yet the answers were equally elusive. The palace itself is a stage, both literally and figuratively. Every room, every hallway, every protocol is designed to convey control and authority. Yet within these walls, human emotions cannot be fully contained. Love, jealousy, resentment, and ambition intermingle with duty, expectation, and legacy. Harry's upbringing unfolded against this backdrop, a life of public appearances overlaid with private speculation. As he grew, he absorbed not only the rules of monarchy, but also the subtle cues of secrecy. What could be asked, what could be ignored, and what must never be mentioned. The whispers about Hewitt, while perhaps unimaginable to outsiders, were part of the fabric of his daily existence. And yet, even in a world defined by secrecy, the public fascination never wanes. The monarchy, while powerful and influential, cannot entirely escape the gaze of the media. Reporters, biographers, and royal commentators constantly probe for inconsistencies, interpret minor gestures, and amplify rumor into narrative. The dynamic is delicate. The palace seeks to preserve dignity, while the world seeks revelation. In Harry's case, this tension was magnified exponentially. Every resemblance to James Hewitt, every fleeting smile, every shared trait became fodder for speculation, whether fair or not. The boy who would grow into a prince was unknowingly being scrutinized not only for who he was, but for the possibility that he might be someone else entirely. This culture of secrecy also extends to personal relationships. Family interactions are filtered through protocol and perception. Emotional expressions are tempered, conversations are measured, and privacy is carefully guarded. Diana's affair with Hewitt, though conducted in a relatively controlled environment, was a deviation from this norm, a breach that carried both emotional and symbolic weight. For Harry, the consequences of such deviations were subtle but profound. Even as a child, he internalized a sense that some truths were untouchable, that questions could not be asked, and that the world operates on layers of reality, some of which are deliberately hidden. The emotional impact of such secrecy cannot be overstated. Children raised in environments where information is controlled, where whispers carry more weight than explanations, often develop heightened sensitivity to social cues, an acute awareness of unspoken dynamics, and a persistent questioning of identity. For Harry, this manifested in complex ways. He oscillated between confidence and self-doubt, curiosity and caution, connection and distance. The presence of rumors about Hewitt amplified these tendencies, embedding a lifelong preoccupation with questions of lineage, loyalty, and belonging. Within this context, every anecdote, every gesture, and every public appearance takes on additional significance. Consider a simple observation: a child who shares a smile or expression with someone outside the immediate family. In most contexts, this is unremarkable. In Harry's world, it is scrutinized, analyzed, and interpreted as potential evidence. The monarchy, for all its tradition, is also a theater of perception, where appearances are often more powerful than facts. Hewitt's relationship with Diana, combined with the subtle familial dynamics, created a scenario in which perception and reality were in constant tension. And yet, the secrecy is not merely imposed externally. It is internalized. Those within the royal family, including Harry, learn early that some truths are dangerous, some questions forbidden, and some observations must be carefully managed. The result is a layered experience of reality, where the external world sees one story, the internal world experiences another, and the individual must navigate the psychological and emotional complexities of both. For Harry, the specter of Hewitt became both a symbol and a question mark. A reminder that identity, even for a prince, is never simple. As we examine the palace's culture of secrets and lies, the stakes of revelation become clear. This is a family that has mastered the art of appearance, yet its members are human, susceptible to desire, error, and emotion. The tension between public expectation and private reality creates a fertile ground for rumor, speculation, and scandal. Harry's life, shaped by both privilege and scrutiny, was inevitably entangled in this web. Every smile, every resemblance, every fleeting glance could be interpreted as evidence, and for decades, the world has been watching, waiting, and questioning. And now, with the alleged DNA test entering the narrative, the centuries-old machinery of secrecy and discretion faces a challenge it cannot easily contain. The palace, the public, and Harry himself are poised at a moment of revelation, one that promises to illuminate truths long obscured by protocol, rumor, and whispered speculation. Every layer of secrecy, every careful concealment, every hidden corridor now carries the potential to unravel. Princess Diana, the people's princess, was beloved worldwide for her grace, compassion, and humanity, but behind the sparkling public persona lay a private world brimming with complexity, heartache, and unspoken truths. She was a woman trapped between duty and desire, expectation and authenticity, and, most importantly, secrecy, and revelation. The confessions she made, both in private diaries and to trusted confidants, paint a picture of a life that was far more complicated than tabloids and official biographies would allow. And it is within these confessions that the threads connecting James Hewitt, the royal family, and young Prince Harry begin to coalesce. Diana's voice, often tender, frequently tinged with frustration or sadness, was the lens through which much of this story can be understood. She was acutely aware of the pressures that came with marrying into the royal family. On the surface, her life seemed enviable: palace walls, royal ceremonies, the pomp of a crown. But beneath the surface, she was isolated, lonely, and longing for a partner who could understand her completely. It was in this emotional vacuum that James Hewitt entered, a man whose presence offered comfort, companionship, and, eventually, intimacy. In her private reflections, Diana often spoke of feeling unseen by her husband, Prince Charles. She described long periods of emotional distance, subtle coldness, and a marriage where communication was strained to the point of invisibility. Her confessions reveal a woman searching for validation, affection, and emotional resonance in a life that demanded performance over authenticity. Hewitt became a source of support, someone who listened, understood, and, most importantly, validated her feelings. Their bond, initially emotional, evolved into something more, creating a private world that existed alongside the demands of public life. But it was more than just companionship. Diana's confessions reveal a woman wrestling with guilt, loyalty, and desire. She was fully aware that her relationship with Hewitt defied the expectations placed upon her, and yet she found herself drawn to him. In letters and interviews, she spoke of moments of passion intertwined with moments of profound fear: fear of discovery, fear of judgment, and fear of how her actions might affect her children. These confessions are critical because they reveal the duality of Diana's life: public devotion and private rebellion, love and secrecy, care and risk. The speculation about Harry's paternity emerges directly from this context. Though James Hewitt's affair with Diana began after Harry's birth, the perception of closeness and timing fueled decades of rumor. Diana herself, in private, acknowledged Hewitt's significance in her life, but was clear about the chronology. Harry was born in 1984. Her affair with Hewitt began in 1986. Yet, even with these clarifications, the whispers persisted. Human perception, after all, is influenced by more than timelines. It is shaped by resemblance, emotion, and narrative coherence. In other words, once the idea took root in the public imagination, it refused to die. Diana's confessions also highlight the emotional impact on her children. Though she did not explicitly connect Hewitt to Harry in public or private, her diaries and interviews reveal a mother deeply concerned with her children's well-being. She sought to shield them from the brunt of palace politics while grappling with her own emotional needs. For Harry, growing up in this environment meant navigating a complex emotional landscape: the love of a mother, the scrutiny of the world, and the whispers that connected his identity to someone outside the immediate family. Diana's confessions illuminate not just her own struggle, but the way it rippled through her children's lives, shaping their perceptions of family, loyalty, and truth. Consider one particularly poignant example. In private letters, Diana expressed both longing and frustration: longing for emotional intimacy, frustration at the constraints of her marriage, and fear for the impact of her choices on her children. She detailed moments of quiet reflection, of looking at her sons and worrying about how much they would understand, how much they might internalize, and how much the outside world would impose upon them. These reflections underscore the extraordinary challenge she faced. Being a mother in an environment where privacy was scarce, public scrutiny was relentless, and the very identity of her children could become a subject of speculation. Diana's confessions also provide insight into her awareness of the media's role in amplifying rumor. She knew that the press had an insatiable appetite for scandal and that any private indiscretion could be transformed into public narrative. Her careful navigation of public appearances, her candid interviews, and her private reflections all reveal a woman acutely aware of the tension between truth and perception. Yet despite this awareness, she could not fully control the narrative. a tension that would continue to affect Harry throughout his life. This duality, public persona versus private truth, is central to understanding the lasting impact of Diana's life and confessions. For Harry, it meant growing up in a world where the line between reality and rumor was blurred. The affection his mother showed him coexisted with the emotional turbulence of her private life. The love of a mother intertwined with whispers of scandal. The protection she offered collided with the exposure she could not avoid. All of these elements combined to create a childhood that was extraordinary in every sense, but also profoundly complex. Moreover, Diana's confessions highlight her foresight and awareness of legacy. She understood that her children would inherit more than titles. They would inherit a world shaped by perception, history, and expectation. She anticipated that questions about lineage, fidelity, and identity would follow them. By documenting her reflections and confiding in trusted friends, she sought to leave a record that could, in time, offer context and clarity. In this way, her confessions were both personal and strategic, an attempt to navigate a world where secrets and truths were inseparable, and where rumors could have lasting consequences. But perhaps the most striking element of Diana's confessions is their emotional honesty. Unlike the carefully curated statements released to the press, these private reflections reveal vulnerability, doubt, and humanity. She acknowledges fear, shame, love, and desire with a candor rarely afforded to someone in her position. This honesty provides critical insight into the emotional world that surrounded young Harry, offering clues about how rumors, secrecy, and private revelations could shape a child's identity long before any DNA test or public scrutiny entered the picture. In essence, Diana's confessions lay the groundwork for understanding the narrative that now reaches its climax. They reveal the emotional landscape of a household where secrecy was necessary but also corrosive, where love and desire collided with duty and scrutiny. They explain why rumors about James Hewitt took root and why they persisted despite timelines that should have dispelled them. And most importantly, they illuminate the emotional stakes for Harry. A boy growing up in a world where the line between perception and reality, rumor and fact, would come to define much of his life. As we move to the next chapter, the focus shifts from private confessions to the very real impact on Harry's childhood. The struggles, the insecurities, and the ways in which whispers, resemblance, and rumor shaped his understanding of himself and his place in the world. Every detail, every observation, every shadow contributed to a story that has been decades in the making, a story that would eventually intersect with science, revelation, and truth. Growing up as a royal is a dream to many, a life of privilege, admiration, and opportunity. But for Prince Harry, those years were anything but ordinary, and far from the fairy tale the world assumed. Beneath the glittering images of ceremonial duties, smiling photographs, and public adoration, lay a childhood complicated by secrecy, speculation, and an emotional landscape shaped by rumors about his very identity. To understand Harry's journey, we must look beyond the palace walls, beyond the headlines, and into the private world where a boy struggled to reconcile love, identity, and belonging. From the earliest moments of his life, Harry was enveloped in both privilege and pressure. Being the second son of Prince Charles and Princess Diana meant that he was immediately thrust into a world defined by rules, appearances, and expectations. But unlike his elder brother William, whose life was often framed in terms of duty and preparation for the crown, Harry's role was more ambiguous. He was the spare, the one whose path was less clearly defined, and yet he carried the same scrutiny, the same public interest, and the same emotional weight as any heir. That ambiguity, combined with whispers of his paternity, created a unique emotional tension from a young age. School life for Harry was a crucible of both ordinary and extraordinary challenges. Boarding schools brought him into contact with peers who were largely unaware of the pressures of royalty, but whose perceptions were nonetheless influenced by his public image. Reports from teachers and friends suggest that Harry displayed a mixture of confidence and restlessness, sometimes brash, sometimes introspective. He was fiercely loyal to friends, yet intensely aware of being different. Even minor slights or teasing could carry enormous weight, not only socially, but psychologically. The rumors about Hewitt, though unspoken in school corridors, hovered in the background, amplified by Harry's own developing awareness that some things about his family were never to be questioned. Home life offered both sanctuary and tension. Diana's love for her children was immense, but her own struggles with depression, isolation, and the pressures of public life created a complicated emotional environment. She sought to protect her sons, shield them from gossip, and provide guidance, yet the very act of shielding them required secrecy. A secrecy that, paradoxically, fueled curiosity and doubt. Harry, sensitive and observant, absorbed these unspoken tensions. He learned that certain topics could not be discussed, that appearances were paramount, and that love could coexist with complexity and contradiction. One of the most formative influences in Harry's childhood was his mother's relationship with James Hewitt. Even though the affair began after Harry's birth, the public's perception, the subtle resemblance noticed by family and outsiders, and the whispers in private circles all contributed to a growing awareness that his identity was being questioned. For a child, understanding these dynamics is confusing and often painful. The sense that some essential part of oneself might be disputed, examined, or doubted creates an internal tension that is difficult to resolve. Harry had to navigate not only ordinary childhood challenges, but also a world where rumor and speculation were inseparable from reality. The media played an enormous role in shaping Harry's childhood experience. Tabloids thrived on speculation, often depicting the royal family in ways that were sensationalized or distorted. Headlines screamed about alleged affairs, whispered scandals, and possible paternity, turning private family dynamics into global fascination. Harry, even as a young boy, was not immune to this scrutiny. From a very early age, he had to learn that his life was public property, that curiosity about his family, and his very identity, was relentless, and that appearances mattered more than truth. Every resemblance to Hewitt, every public gesture, every private anecdote risked becoming fodder for headlines. Yet, it wasn't all isolation and scrutiny. Harry's childhood was marked by moments of joy, camaraderie, and normalcy wherever possible. He formed close bonds with friends at school, developed a sense of humor that would later define his public persona, and showed early signs of resilience and courage. These moments of light were critical in providing balance against the darker undercurrents of rumor and secrecy. They also reveal an important aspect of Harry's character, a determination to maintain his own identity, even within the constraints of royalty and public expectation. Emotional turbulence was, however, a constant companion. Reports and memoirs indicate that Harry sometimes struggled with self-doubt, feelings of inadequacy, and questions about belonging. These struggles were compounded by the shadow of speculation about his father. While the adult world framed the rumors as gossip or intrigue, for a child they were questions of fundamental identity. Who am I? Who shaped me? Who do I belong to? The emotional stakes were extraordinarily high, and they shaped the way Harry interacted with the world, his family, and himself. One striking dimension of Harry's childhood struggles was the contrast between the public and private spheres. In public, he was a prince, smiling, poised, ceremonious. In private, he wrestled with emotions, insecurities, and questions that were uniquely his own. This duality created a heightened sense of self-awareness, a constant negotiation between expectation and reality. The whispers about Hewitt intensified this duality, reinforcing the tension between what was known, what was suspected, and what could never be openly acknowledged. Friendships and early mentorships also played a critical role in Harry's development. Trusted aides, teachers, and friends offered guidance, perspective, and sometimes a sounding board for the questions that could not be asked aloud. Their presence provided some stability, yet even these relationships were framed by the broader context of secrecy and scrutiny. The balance between connection and caution, intimacy and discretion, was a constant theme throughout Harry's formative years. Perhaps the most profound aspect of Harry's childhood struggles was the psychological weight of unresolved questions. Children naturally seek to understand their place in the world, their identity, and their familial relationships. When these questions are complicated by rumor, speculation, or secrecy, the impact is magnified exponentially. Harry's awareness of the whispers surrounding Hewitt, combined with his acute sensitivity and intelligence, created a persistent tension. A sense that something fundamental about his life was hidden, even if he could not articulate it fully. And yet, through it all, Harry developed resilience. He learned to navigate a world of paradoxes, balancing joy and pressure, love and secrecy, curiosity and caution. These skills, honed in childhood, would later define his approach to public life, media scrutiny, and personal revelations. The rumors, while painful, were part of a broader education in navigating the complexities of identity, legacy, and human emotion. From the very beginning, Prince Harry's life was not his own. Born into one of the most scrutinized families in the world, he was thrust into an environment where every smile, every gesture, and every resemblance was noted, dissected, and broadcast. But it wasn't only the monarchy's centuries-old traditions or the pressures of royal expectations that shaped his life. It was also the relentless, insatiable appetite of the media. Tabloids, newspapers, and television programs thrived on scandal, rumor, and intrigue, and for Harry, the whispers about James Hewitt became a story repeated, analyzed, and magnified on a global scale. The British press, particularly in the 1980s and 1990s, operated in a way that made privacy nearly impossible for the royal family. Photographers camped outside residences, reporters tracked movements, and every public event was an opportunity to dig for a narrative. The story of Diana and Hewitt, once private, became a headline that could sell papers by the millions. Even after the affair ended, its shadow lingered, particularly around Harry. The press never hesitated to draw comparisons, to speculate on paternity, or to highlight any physical resemblance between boy and man. For a child, this is not just public exposure. It is a constant psychological pressure, an invisible weight that follows one from bedroom to playground, from palace corridors to classroom hallways. Consider the impact of repeated exposure to rumor. Imagine seeing your likeness, your gestures, your mannerisms dissected and debated by strangers on a daily basis. Imagine the confusion of growing up hearing whispers, knowing that your life is not your own, and understanding that even your mother's private confessions could become public fodder. The media frenzy transformed a personal story into a global spectacle, turning speculation into truth for millions of readers and viewers. Even when timelines contradicted the rumor, Hewitt's affair beginning after Harry's birth, the narrative persisted because perception often outweighs fact in the court of public fascination. Tabloids did more than report, they created stories. Every anecdote about Diana, every photo of Hewitt, every glimpse of young Harry could be framed to suggest intrigue. Headlines connected the dots in ways that were suggestive, dramatic, and often misleading. The British press, adept at storytelling, leveraged human curiosity to perpetuate a cycle of rumor and obsession. Harry became both observer and subject of a story he could not control, a narrative shaped by others and amplified by repetition. International media followed suit. Newspapers and magazines in the United States, Europe, and beyond eagerly translated British speculation into global headlines. The fascination was fueled not only by the royal connection, but by the universal themes embedded in the story: love, betrayal, identity, and secrecy. People around the world were captivated by the idea that a prince, a boy whose every move was supposed to be defined by tradition, might have a hidden story, a truth lurking just beneath the surface. It was a narrative impossible to resist, one that transformed a family secret into global fascination. The public's role in amplifying the media frenzy cannot be understated. Readers, viewers, and fans consumed every morsel of gossip, debated the nuances of resemblance, and speculated endlessly about timelines and motivations. Social conversations, schoolyard discussions, and public forums all contributed to a culture in which the rumor about Hewitt became not just plausible, but almost inevitable. The perception that Harry might not be Charles's son entered the cultural consciousness, shaping public opinion and influencing the way the world viewed him long before he could form his own understanding of the narrative. But media pressure was not only external, it infiltrated the very fabric of palace life. Royal aides, security personnel, and family members were acutely aware of the potential for rumor to spiral into scandal. Discretion was paramount, yet the more controlled the environment, the more intense the speculation became. This paradox, attempting to manage exposure while simultaneously generating curiosity, created a tense, high-stakes environment for Harry. Every public appearance, every official photo, and even every casual interaction became a potential source of interpretation, a piece of evidence in a story he had no role in authoring. The press also exploited timing and context. Photographs of Harry as a child, smiling, gesturing, or displaying physical traits, were often juxtaposed with images of Hewitt in ways that emphasized resemblance. Commentators speculated about character traits, mannerisms, and even hair color or eye shape. Such analyses, though superficial, gained authority through repetition and visibility. For young Harry, these public interpretations were a subtle form of pressure, a reminder that his identity was under scrutiny, debated not only by his family, but by a global audience invested in the intrigue. Moreover, the media amplified emotion. Stories were framed in ways that evoked drama, sympathy, or outrage. Diana's struggles were portrayed with both admiration and scandal. Hewitt's role was sensationalized, and Harry's likeness to Hewitt became a recurring motif. These emotional narratives were designed to engage audiences, sustain curiosity, and encourage ongoing consumption. For the family involved, the consequences were profound. Private experiences became public theater, and every decision carried the potential to become a headline. In this environment, even small events could escalate into worldwide news. A smile at a public event could be interpreted as recognition or complicity. A casual interaction could be framed as evidence of intimacy or connection. The press's ability to construct stories from minimal data created a persistent atmosphere of tension and speculation. For Harry, this meant growing up in a world where nothing could be taken at face value, where personal experiences were constantly interpreted through the lens of public fascination. And yet, Harry's resilience began to emerge amidst this scrutiny. He developed a sharp sense of humor, a rebellious streak, and an acute awareness of how to navigate public perception. These traits, forged in childhood under pressure, became essential tools for managing both media attention and personal identity. But the rumors about Hewitt remained a subtle, persistent undertone, a question that could not be addressed openly and a shadow that would follow him into adulthood. As the media frenzy intensified, so did the stakes. The whispers about Hewitt, the speculation about lineage, and the scrutiny of resemblance all set the stage for a revelation that, decades later, would become explosive. The world's fascination was no longer abstract. It was a story that could intersect with science, evidence, and personal revelation. And for Harry, the media's obsession with the narrative meant that any confirmation or refutation of the rumors would not be private. It would be global. The relentless spotlight created a paradoxical environment. The closer he was to family and friends, the more exposed he felt. The more he sought normalcy, the more extraordinary the public attention became. And as we move toward the next chapter, the focus will shift to the pivotal moments that transformed private whispers into an unavoidable reality. Diana's final reflections, public statements, and the escalating tension surrounding identity, legitimacy, and truth. Every element of secrecy, speculation, and scrutiny has built to this point, and the consequences for Harry are only beginning to emerge. Rumors about Prince Harry's paternity have persisted for decades, fueled by public fascination, media speculation, and whispered conversations in private circles. But at the heart of every debate lies a single question: what is the timeline? When did James Hewitt enter Diana's life? And how does that intersect with Harry's birth? Understanding this chronology is essential, not just to separate fact from fiction, but to grasp the emotional weight these rumors carried throughout Harry's childhood and into adulthood. Prince Harry was born on September 15, 1984, to Princess Diana and Prince Charles. At the time, the world celebrated the arrival of the spare to the heir, a boy whose presence symbolized continuity, legacy, and hope. The pregnancy, by all public records, was a product of Diana and Charles's marriage, a union already strained but intact. Harry's birth was marked by public ceremony, media attention, and the beginnings of a life that would forever exist under scrutiny. At this point, James Hewitt had not yet entered the royal narrative, and the notion of alternative paternity was, on paper, impossible. James Hewitt began his relationship with Princess Diana in 1986, 2 years after Harry's birth. The timing, repeatedly confirmed in memoirs, interviews, and public records, is critical. By all factual accounts, there is no biological possibility for Hewitt to be Harry's father. Yet the timeline alone did not quell public speculation. The media, hungry for scandal, often framed the story in ways that blurred chronology, emphasizing physical resemblance, mannerisms, and perceived personality traits rather than strictly adhering to dates. This selective interpretation allowed the rumor to flourish, even when factual evidence contradicted it. But timing is more than just a matter of dates. It is also about perception. Those observing the royal family, both insiders and outsiders, noticed the emotional intensity of Diana and Hewitt's relationship. Their closeness, apparent in both private and occasionally public interactions, fueled speculation that could easily bleed into assumptions about lineage. Even after timelines were clarified, many in the public imagination continued to draw connections, relying on resemblance and narrative coherence rather than chronological fact. In the world of rumor, perception often outweighs reality. To understand the implications of the timeline, it is important to consider the emotional and psychological context. For young Harry, the rumors, regardless of their factual basis, carried enormous weight. Children are remarkably perceptive, absorbing not only what is said but what is implied. The whispers about Hewitt, amplified by media coverage, private conversations, and subtle hints, created an atmosphere in which Harry's identity was quietly questioned. The chronology, while clear on paper, did not diminish the internalized tension or the sense of uncertainty that accompanies repeated speculation about one's own parentage. Historical records, memoirs, and public interviews provide additional clarity. Diana's own words confirm the timing of her affair with Hewitt, and Hewitt himself has consistently stated that his relationship with Diana began after Harry's birth. In interviews, he has emphasized this point, acknowledging the rumors while insisting on the factual impossibility of him being Harry's biological father. These statements, however, have done little to quell the persistent narrative, which thrives on speculation, coincidence, and the human tendency to connect dots, even when those connections defy logic. The timeline also intersects with other key events in the royal family. Diana's increasing estrangement from Prince